Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I present myself. I'm Mauricio Peñoles, General Manager from the Center of California Davis in Chile. We are very happy from our center's behalf to count on your presentation, on your presence in this seminar from the Chile Californian Experience, Strengthening the National Beer Brewing Industry, and to have famous, noted professionals and professors in the area of brewing, working both in Chile and in California. What we look for in this seminar, like in other seminars, is that our International Center of Excellence that we've developed in Chile is to generate experience exchange with our panelists, our high-level panelists, and to see what are the key factors that determine the development of this industry towards the future. We've also brought together with this seminar different actors, different protagonist actors from the national brewing scene. I appreciate them for participating. Where we know we will be able to see then a vision on the successes and opportunities and how the sector looks towards the future. There are diverse actors that exist in the national beer brewing scene. I remember 15, 20 years ago when the beer market used to be more simple. You would go to the supermarket with 2 to 3 options, no more. Fortunately, and I say this with a personal touch, the variety and the diversity of available beers in our Chilean markets have been increased exponentially, equaling all other countries, like, for example, the US, where clearly the different sizes, the different types of businesses with different realities to them are key in the value chain of this industry. Something that is not forgoable is quality. Quality independent of the segment we point towards and the size of market we point towards is something that shouldn't be forgotten. Without a doubt, these actors whom are here today sitting with us, both as panelists and yourselves in the audience, respond to this market as with more demanding consumers. And I think issues like flavor, smell, packaging, labeling, even innovation and development, not necessarily has to, sometimes with production and processes, but sometimes with markets and sustainability that some consumers are demanding, are key issues that we hope can cover with this seminar. Well, I wish to thank specifically and especially the participation of our keynote speakers, Charles, a recognized UC Davis professor with broad years of experience in the beer industry, as we say in Chile, a beer famous person, and also Glenn, who not many years ago joined UC Davis. I was able to meet him personally when he was 3 months barely installed in California. People whom are working in the beer brewing world in the US, in California, and the rest of the world in general. Bolivia will also be presented in detail, and also to thank our panelists that will participate. Olivia will present them, Olivia Valles, whom I will also introduce, and also to mainly thank our partners of the event, Cervecería Austral Intrínseco, Inolab, and AV and Bed and Maltexco breweries, and also to thank the organization that has supported us, the Chilean Brewers Association and the Independent Chile Brewers Society, ASI, and also our digital partners, which is Centrum Events, conventions, and virtual exhibitions, which make possible for this to happen in formats with high standards. I also want to give more administrative notes. Let us remember that we have simultaneous interpretation into English and Spanish, which can be accessed by doing click on the button that is seen in the virtual room. You can choose the language that most accommodates you. And to start and with our engines, I would like to know more. When I connected, there were more than 70 people connected. I think it's many more. I do not have access to the number, but we wish to do a mini survey, Zoom survey, to see who's present today. For this, we ask to please scan the QR codes with your mobile phones, those whom are on screen. And if you have problems with connections, you can directly go into the slido.com website and go into the event through hashtag UC Davis Chile. I will give some minutes so people can connect and mini survey to know whom is truly sitting in some of these, some in their homes, some in their offices. This is the good thing of the pandemic that has allowed us to bring closer people from different countries in a more simple fashion. So let us make the most of these technological advances. Let us go with our survey then. Let me scan myself too. There we are. Let's see whom is present today. Please answer your surveys. Results will be shown simultaneously. We've done a separation, a segmentation scene, a a broad segmentation. And what we are able to see in real time effects, the majority of the participants today are in small scale brewing. This doesn't only show us changes in consumption, but also changes in production habits. 20 years ago, I remember when I got back to Chile, I loved the world of brewing. I would brew beer at home, but when I came to Chile, it was difficult to find supplies and all of the equipment necessary. And then 15, 20 years ago, later, it's incredible to see how this has developed both as a hobby, which moved from hobby towards a more consolidated industry at a smaller scale. Well, then, I believe that we have the data all counted for. A third of the audience then is considered to microbrewing, as said in English, interested in starting artisanal brewing operations. 19%, other 11% are suppliers of materials, commercial, large scale producers, researchers, students 4%, and consultants, analysis and quality insurance. A quite interesting composition. I think this will give us lines towards what we should emphasize on each of our presentations. So then, let us, without further ado, go into the subject at hand. And the figures change. We have 94 answers, but without further ado, to present and introduce to you Olivia Valdez. Olivia is part of our team of the UC Davis Chile team. She's our food science coordinator, whom is in charge of food. And personally, I consider beer to be a food completely along the line, but also has to do with raw material processing. Olivia has also touched on many transversal issues on sustainability. Circular economy has been one of her large aspects in the last years. Olivia is an important part of our center, and I leave her with the introductions of the activities to follow, the keynote speakers, and the panels. So thank you, Olivia. I leave this in your hand now.
Muchas gracias, Mauricio.
Thank you very much,
Es muy
Mauricio, for said
interesante tener
introduction.
la
It's interesting
experiencia
to
de saber que
have
estamos hoy
the
día presentes.
diagnosis and an x-ray of
Y
who
bueno,
is present today.
para poder
And
retomar la
well,
agenda y
to
contarnos un poco,
consider our agenda and what we are called
es
today
cómo podemos
towards,
transformar
we've come
la
to talk of
ciencia
how
y la
to
innovación
transform
con la
science and innovation
experiencia
and
y la
how to collect
trayectoria que tiene
experience and the
California.
trajectory that
Durante todos
California
estos últimos
has,
años, la
specifically
Universidad
the
de
role they've
California
had, the of
apoyando el
University
desarrollo
California
y el valor
Davis,
agregado
supporting the
de
development,
nuevas
the added value,
líneas
and
de
new
producción
lines of
en la
development and
carretera
product
California
in the
Sur
local Californian industry. And our great goal of the day to maintain this activity is to share experiences between Chile and California to enrich our local industries, and on the other hand, to know of lessons and the evolution that the beer brewing industry has lived in California. What are the main drivers that today stimulate innovation and development and could be of great use as reference, model, and inspiration in the national beer brewing industry? So first of all, we wish to thank Glenn and Charles. I will now give way towards their presentations. We will start now with Charles Bamford's presentation. Charles, as mentioned by Mauricio, is a renowned research and senior advisor in the beer industry, emeritus professor and distinguished professor at California Davis. He started in the initiation of development of innovation and research in beer brewing of the university. And among his lines of research, he is noted for all his studies on enzymatic issues and the role and in the elaboration of beer, and also has research regarding the potentials of the brewing industry residues and their use as prebiotics in beer, author of more than 20 bestsellers, which I imagine many of the audience have already read and may have as Bible on in their nightstands. So without extending myself more, I recognize Charles and open the floor so that he can give us his message and presentation and all of his comments for Chile.
Thank you, Olivia.
So Charles.
It's very nice to be with you. Thank you. I hope you can see my screen. What I'd like to do today is to give you a brief history of what's happened over the years at UC Davis, and then give the floor to Glenn Fox, my successor as the Anheuser-Busch Endowed Professor at UC Davis. And brewing education and teaching really started at UC Davis in 1958. And this was the brewery that was donated to the campus in 1958 by the Lucky Lager Brewing Company from San Francisco, and a gentleman by the name of Reuben Schneider. And what Reuben Schneider did was to write to the then head of the food technology department, Emil Marak. Emil Marak became the president or the chancellor of UC Davis. This is the man in the white suit to the right here. So this was a small brewery, and Schneider wrote to Marak and said, it's about time you started teaching people how to brew beer. Already UC Davis was educating people in the production of wine, but 1958 was when beer first came onto the curriculum at UC Davis. And the first teacher was a celebrated mycologist. Then it went through one short term from a gentleman by the name of Tommy Nakayama. And then a gentleman by the name of Michael Lewis taught the brewing program for many years, from the early 60s until his retirement in the early 90s. So UC Davis has had a long-standing relationship with the brewing industry in the whole of the United States and beyond. And of course, over the years was presenting or delivering a lot of people into the industry. And probably the company that took advantage of that the most was Anheuser-Busch, the old Anheuser-Busch. And I arrived in 1999 as the Anheuser-Busch Endowed Professor. What they wanted to do was to ensure that brewing continued to be on the curriculum at UC Davis. And they realized that many of the people that will be educated, they wanted to go into the industry generally. Many of them perhaps wanted to go ahead and start their own brewing companies. But certainly Anheuser-Busch recognized that it wasn't only them that was going to take advantage of the program, and they very much wanted it to continue at UC Davis. So when I arrived in 1999, this is what I inherited. It was the same brewery. Not a lot had been invested in the program. So Anheuser-Busch really were tremendously helpful. Not only did they endow the professorship, They also, I drove to St. Louis, and they loaded up a U-Haul with lots of equipment for me. And also we built a new brewery. The gentleman on the left there, next to me, is Reuben Schneider. So Reuben was very glad to come back to UC Davis to see what we were doing. And you can see around us now, we'd started in the old Cruise Hall to put in place a brewery. And when we formally opened it, Doug Moorman, the guy on the left there is Doug Moorman. He was the VP of all technical issues at Anheuser-Busch. And we were very proud to actually establish this facility in the early 2000s in the old building. And then a gentleman by the name of Robert Mondavi, well known in the world of wine, and there's he with his wife, Margaret. And I insisted that I get him a photograph of him holding one of my books as well, just to show that Robert Mondavi fully recognized the importance of beer. But the Mondavis gave a huge amount of money to the university to allow us to build a new facility, the Robert Mondavi Institute. And this is an image of what the facility looks like. This, therefore, was now home to not only the Department of Food Science and Technology, wherein is the brewing program, but also the Department of Viticulture and Enology. But when we built these buildings full of wonderful laboratories, research laboratories, there was no pilot facility. So as the chairman of the Department of Food Science, I had to raise the money to put in a new pilot facility, which we did. We needed $10 million to build a new facility. And $5 million of that money came from Anheuser-Busch. In fact, a pledge from the Anheuser-Busch Foundation. And we named the building the August A. Busch III Brewing and Food Science Laboratory. But we had to move the brewery across a new facility. And it cost just $120,000 just to actually move this brewery, this 1.5 barrel US barrel brewery, remembering there's 1.1 hectoliters in a US barrel. And the rest of the money, a lot of it came from the tomato processing industry, but we had lots of other generous people as well, including Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada, who not only gave the money which allowed us to see the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company Research Laboratory, but also helped us to actually finalize this facility. And later he endowed the brewing position. So the brewer at UC Davis is the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company endowed brewer. But lots of other people were generous as well. So we have these wonderful facilities that I'm sure that Glenn will describe in further detail later on. We've come a very long way. And this facility is available and used not only for teaching and research, but also for outreach, the three main parts of a university brewing or university brewers or university professors role. Changing tack slightly, then we have a famous US president, Jimmy Carter, and I'm not sure this is what he's standing at this time, but in 1978, he was the guy who signed into law allowing people now to brew themselves. So it made, on the federal level, home brewing legal. So many people who had already been brewing when they were able to consider not only developing their home brewing interests, but also developing new brewing companies. And so here we are, California, a University of California, UC Davis, a land grant university. So we are charged with the task of supporting the interests of California and, of course, beyond. And the history of brewing in California is a long-standing one, but probably one of the most famous names is Fritz Maytag. Fritz Maytag bought a rapidly decaying brewery called the Anchor Brewing Company in San Francisco. And many people point to Fritz as being the guy who really turned people on to brewing. He often used to tell me that he inherited the last medieval brewery in the world. But he did wonderful things, and before selling the company a number of years ago, his was the name that really was associated with championing the interest in beer. Another legend is this guy, Jack McAuliffe. There's the before and then photograph. There he was on the left when he established his own brewing company, the New Albion Brewing Company in Sonoma, California. And he built it himself. So the second model, the first model was Fritz Maytag inheriting a long-standing brewery. But Jack McAuliffe, who was in the Navy, went over to Scotland, fell in love with the beer in the British Isles and decided he wanted to make it when he got back and came out of the Navy. But of course, you couldn't get a catalog in those days. You couldn't buy small-scale brewing equipment. You had to make your own. So he made his own. And that inspired a lot of people. His business model really wasn't very good. He didn't brew enough beer. If you're going to make a living out of it, you got to sell enough beer. And he didn't really have the plans to actually develop on a significant scale. But he inspired many others. Most notable of all, certainly being this gentleman, Ken Grossman. Ken Grossman founded the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company back in 1980. And he went up and down California, bought old equipment, dairy tanks. He made his own first lauter tun. He drilled all the holes himself to make himself a lauter tun. And now, of course, he's got what I would consider probably the two most beautiful breweries in the world. The one on the top right here is the brewery in Chico, the original brewery in Northern California, about 100 miles north of where we are here in Davis. But of course, the other one on the East Coast in North Carolina at Mills River, a beautiful location, the ultimate in brewery destinations. Not only does it look great, it does, of course, makes a wonderful beer, and everything about the Sierra Nevada operations is about doing things right. Because it made perfect sense to build a brewery on the East Coast, because it doesn't make sense to ship beer more than 3,000 miles, because most beers are at least 90% water, and you don't want to be shipping water vast distances. And not only that, it's better for quality to brew as close as possible to the marketplace. So this is a history of the California brewing industry, which basically comes from the California Craft Brewers Association website. And you can see back there on the left-hand side, Fritz Maytag in 1965, and then in 1977, Jack McAuliffe with New Albion, Ken starting his brewery in 1980, various other people coming into the play, including Vinny Cilurzo in 1994 with the Russian Brewing Company. So when this the illustration was first produced, there were 850 breweries in California, and that was in 2017. Now, if you go to a year later, there's more than 1,000 breweries in California. It's a lot of brewing companies. If I could just segue slightly, you've detected the English accent now. Back in the United Kingdom, there are about 2,000 breweries, and the whole of the United Kingdom, landmass-wise, will fit into California twice. So there's still plenty of scope for the development of brewing in California, as well as in many other places as well. So as you can see, a huge economic impact, $9 billion economic impact in 2018. A lot of contribution to the state. So UC Davis, as I said before, three legs to the stool: teaching, research, and outreach. Teaching, I started a class called FST3, a general education class. It became the most popular class on campus, more than 1,000 students every year at all levels, learning about beer as a general science class. And then we put it online, this was before the days of COVID, but we put it online to make it available to other campuses within the UC system. And then the two long-standing upper division classes, FST 102A, which is the theory of malting and brewing, and 102B, which is the practical class. And these have grown immeasurably over the years, huge numbers of students. When I first came to Davis, there were about 15, 20 students in 102A. When I left, there were about 80, and similar growth in the size of 102B. To get into these classes, students have got to do all the fundamental basic science and engineering classes, very much classes 102A and 102B that a student can only take once they've done all the basic chemistry, biochemistry, chemical engineering, microbiology, and so on. But we also have continuing professional education call it University Extension. And there are many courses here, and I'll leave that to Glenn to tell you about what the current situation is there. In terms of research, the focus is very much on relevant research that is material that is accessible and useful to the industry and all associated industries. So it's always been my philosophy in more than 4 years nearly brewing industry. Whenever I do research, there's going to be some purpose towards it. It's not just blue skies research. And then, of course, we have a role to spread the good word and the promotion of beer as a worthwhile component of the society. So there's a lot of output there, but I always considered our number one output being people and the education of people, whether they are campus students or people in the brewing industry, anywhere in the world. Of course, these days, the way we're doing business is very much online, making it possible to do things globally. Now, of course, as many of you will be aware, there's an interesting world out there in brewing. There's a lot of consolidation. Of course, a few years ago, we saw AB InBev acquiring large elements of SAB Miller and so on. And a lot of interest in the larger brewing companies in the so-called craft sector. And I always put craft in inverted commas because I consider a brewer on any scale, whether they're a very large brewing company or a very small one, as long as they're properly educated and properly trained and adept, I consider them to be craftspeople, craftsmen and craftswomen. There's a lot of innovation going on in products in the brewing industry. And of course, there is tremendous competition. Beer has no God-given right to be the beverage of choice. I personally like to think it will be the beverage of choice, but we have this concept of share of throat. There's so many different choices that people have. The traditional competition is beer versus wine, but brewers, of course, these days are innovating in all sorts of different ways and straying, should we say, from the world of beers, classic beers as we know them. Of course, COVID has had a significant effect. You know, it would very easily have been thought that the advent or the development of COVID would hit brewing hard. But actually, it's been remarkable in terms of increases in beer volumes in many places because particularly if you have put your beer in small pack cans or bottles, because then there is tremendous interest in perhaps enjoying a beer in somewhat strenuous times. Not so good for people relying on draft beer sales. That's been a big problem. Equally, in some parts of the world, I'm thinking particularly of places like South Africa, they responded in a different way, and there was a prohibition brought in. So it's been a big challenge in different parts of the world. But in terms of education, we have really turned to online systems very much and reaching people out there. And these days, people now, rather than coming to Davis to learn, they can still be at their home, they can still and dialing into the education systems without interfering with their production regime. So let me just finish my presentation by talking about some of the issues that I think are highly important. And right at the top of my list always is quality. Quality. Of course, quality means different things to different people, and different people have different ideas of what is a great beer. Some people love sour beers. I'm not a big fan of sour beers, but quality is consistency. Beer quality is achieving the target product every time. And if you meet the customer's expectation and that is their idea of quality, then you have achieved your goal. There's a lot of gimmicks going on. I'm not a big fan of gimmicks. I think the Reinheitsgebot in Germany is one step too far, just malt, hops, yeast, and water. I think that restricts too much. But equally, I'm not a big fan of putting strange materials into beer. So I think peanut butter should be left spread on bread. I wouldn't even eat it there. I certainly don't think it should be put into beer. I think the ultimate job of a brewer, first and foremost, is to make beer. And I just wish there was a tighter definition of exactly what beer must be without making it too restrictive. There's a huge amount of interest in alternative products, a lot of interest in seltzers and alcoholic teas and so on. And I understand why people these things, but equally, I think people should be championing beer as much as possible. Alternative paradigms. The brewing process is reasonably traditional. It gets modified by tweaking. From time to time, including myself, we've done work on finding alternative ways, possibly, of making some of these products. I'm not a fan, but equally, there is every reason why, particularly if people are moving in the direction of things like alcoholic seltzers, why should they be doing things, unless it's for tax reasons, doing things in traditional ways? We must always have mind towards responsibility and people's image of beer. Beer does not have a great image in some parts of the world. People talk about beer bellies and so on. But we've done a lot of work showing and demonstrating, confirming that beer is probably the healthiest adult beverage on the planet when consumed in moderation. But equally, I personally think there's a lot of it benefit to being presenting people with the option for lower alcohol products, not necessarily alcohol free, but lower alcohol products. So the image of beer, I think it's very important that brewers and people who enjoy beer should be building it up, to be stressing how it can be a part of a healthy diet. It is probably the best thing you can pair with food. Because there's such diversity and so many diverse foods. But we should always be stressing a responsibility. And in terms of that, of course, mindful of environmental issues, water usage, energy usage, volatile organic compounds, emissions, co-products, and so on. It can be a fairly intense process. And so much of the research is and should be focused on environmental issues and recognizing that beer can be produced in a highly environmentally friendly way. So the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is it is about education, educating the brewer, and UC Davis has a long-standing job in that area, but also in educating the consumer and educating people selling beer and stressing that beer is of adult beverages. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Charles, for that very interesting presentation and inspiring, I guess, for all of us as attendees. I love the fact that you mentioned that relevant research should have a purpose, and that should also inform the efforts in the research and development. How can the science really provide new tools and new information that will be actionable for added value solutions in the industry? So thank you for that. I will continue to present Glenn, and after we have both presentations, we would have a brief Q&A to answer some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat. So I want to give Glenn the opportunity to share his screen, and meanwhile I will briefly present him. Voy a aprovechar de hacer la presentación de
She's
Glenn.
switching into Spanish now. She's going to introduce Glenn as he shares his screen.
Thank you very much. Voy a presentar a
So
Glenn.
she is going to introduce Glenn. Glenn is Australian, just as commented by Mauricio several years ago. He had arrived to California as professor in sciences in the brewery at the Food Sciences and Technology School. Glenn has been recognized in the American societies of chemists, brewing chemists, and also author of several books, particularly mentioning all of the work that he has published related to his research on sustainability of barley and what's related with how to incorporate management practices and innovation in sustainability along the value chain in beer brewing. So, without further ado, I leave you now with Glenn so that he can give us his presentation, and I will save our questions for our Q&A at the end of the panel.
Thank you, Olivia, and it's great to be with you this morning in California. Thank you, Charlie, for giving that great overview of the program and the development of the UC Davis Brewing Program and many developments in the industry, certainly driven by many great brewers in California. And yes, the numbers are still up over the 1,000 craft breweries in California. In many ways, it's these craft brewers that have guided some of the research that we've done, that Charlie did, and I'm doing at UC Davis. It's all a partnership we have with the industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research we're doing currently and looking to the future as well and where things might be going. As Charlie mentioned, we do have these three elements: the teaching, research, and outreach. I will cover the research and specifically the continuing education, because I think there's some great opportunities for partnering with Chile brewers and increasing their knowledge and skills base through some of our programs. So the research we're doing covering basically the raw materials, grains and malt, hops and yeast, and we're doing some what we think is quite novel but very applied research for the industry in looking at upcycling one of our waste streams, particularly the spent grains. That's a large volume waste that brewers have to deal with. And one recurring topic that comes up, and it was first mentioned in the 1800s, they talk about this refreshing power of hops, which we call dry hopping. But there's this sort of sideline that goes with this, which we call hop creep, where there's sort of a continued fermentation happening beyond what the brewer is expecting, with a lower final gravity and an increase in the alcohol content. This is happening more often than most brewers would like, and it becomes a bigger problem in packaged beer if they're actually doing a little bit of dry hopping in packaged beer. And what has become a very recent issue for us, and it sort of ties into something I'm going to talk about with climate change, we're having to deal with wildfires, not just in California now, but across the west coast of the US. And certainly the hop harvest in 2020 suffered from smoke contamination. And we're trying to understand what the effect of that smoke contamination is and how we could possibly mitigate that in the processing. So initially covering the grains and malt quality, certainly we're faced with these strange, they're not so strange, they're becoming more predictable changes in climate. More heat waves, and we're experiencing another heat wave right now in California. The temperature today is going to be 40 degrees Celsius. And I think that's our third week we've had temperatures over 40 degrees. And a significant decrease for California again is in another drought, whereas 2 states over to the east, they're in a flood. Arizona's getting some terrible floods at the moment. So there's this greater diversion between climate, heat and drought, and then flooding rains. How does that impact on our processing industries? How does that impact on our grain production, our raw materials, the wildfires with hops? So we're trying to understand not just how it impacts on production. Yes, it can impact on yield. We get heat waves and drought. It impacts on barley yield, wheat yields, so the farmers don't get the income they're looking for, on quality. And more than just protein content and grain size, it impacts on compositional quality. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at some alternative grains, and Charlie mentioned some alternatives, alternative products. We're looking at alternative grains as well, because it's possible that there are other grain types out there that are more suited to some of the climatic regions that are experiencing some extreme events. So we're used to growing barley and wheat. These are not native crops to most of the countries that wheat and barley evolved out of the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, but have moved around the world. So they're not what we would consider a true native crop in many countries. There are other native crops that potentially offer some alternatives. So instead of relying completely on barley or wheat or rice, there might be other local native crops that people can start looking to introduce into the system. When we look at these alternatives, how do they impact on flavor? So we look at base malt flavors, and we understand that more. Work with colleagues at Colorado State University looking at the effect of malt aging on flavor. And anecdotally, over years, people have said, I don't want to use malt within a 1 month of production. They like to wait a month before they'll use fresh malt. But they also know that if they buy malt and store it for 6, 9, 12 months, that there is a change in the quality. So we're trying to understand that in a deeper level profile rather than standard malt analysis. My previous work was also looking at starch quality and the impact on gelatinization. So how rapidly and how efficient is the starch enzymes converting starch to sugars. We're seeing this happen. There are problems happening because climate change is changing the starch structure. So it's actually becoming more intense to produce enough fermentable sugars, because sometimes the starch isn't readily gelatinizable at normal mashing temperatures. And the other thing we're looking at here is, my apologies, that image is covering that last point, but more real-time measurement, and not just gravity, but we're wanting to have real-time, so to put technology in the brewer's hands so they can actually have more understanding of sugars and amino acids and bittering compounds real-time in the brew house. So that will empower the brewers to have much more knowledge about what's actually going on in the brewery, and allow them to make decisions about if they need to change the process or shorten some of the steps in a process so they can hit some targets. In terms of the hops, as I mentioned earlier, we're getting into trying to understand more about this hop creep that's associated with dry hopping. We've recently had a student finish who did a very interesting project looking at the yeast side of this potential story. Can yeast mitigate hop creep, or how do different yeasts deal with potential hop creep? And yes, most yeasts still will continue to ferment and provide alcohol and CO2 once hops are introduced in fermentation. Different yeast will deal with it slightly differently, but in the end, they're still producing more alcohol and a lower gravity. So we're sort of saying, well, the yeast really isn't probably a solution. So we're going to move upstream, and we're going to be looking more around understanding composition of the non-fermentable sugars, as well as understanding more about the enzymes coming from the hops. As I mentioned, the smoke taint issue in hops, we're looking to understand how we could possibly drive off some of these smoke phenol compounds and not impact on flavor. So where can we deal with these smoke taint hops in the process? If we're forced to use them, hopefully we've got a test that now we can say, no, these hops are contaminated, so we don't need to use them, or we can't use them. But if brewers are forced to use them, then where can they use them and they won't carry through these phenolic flavors? Also, there's some interesting conversations around the alternative to hops. So we know that when hops were first introduced into brewing in around 900 AD, hops have been used for other things, preservatives and flavoring. But when they were introduced to beer, it certainly had a positive impact. And then a few hundred years later, well, several hundred years later, with the British introducing IPAs, so they knew the power of hops to act as a preservative, but also to sort of increase the alcohol content. So we're looking for alternatives as well. People were using alternatives for bittering, alternative plants for flavoring long before hops were used. So we're exploring those now, again, as an alternative crop in areas where it can't easily grow hops or can't easily source hops. So more local, more native plants might be suitable. And we're not looking for things like THC and CBD to be added. As a land-grant university, we can't do research on that anyway, and I don't think we need to worry about that. There's much more interesting things add to beer than that. We're certainly looking at yeasts. There's a collection of yeasts here. There's the FAF collection at UC Davis, and it's got about 1,000 different strains of yeasts, not just Saccharomyces, but also other yeast sources. So we're starting to explore that collection to see if there's some interesting yeasts with novel flavors and aromas that we can bring to the industry, make flavors that we're expecting to come from other raw materials, but in some ways the yeast can produce these flavors themselves. So again, the yeast might be able to bring some novelty to the process where we're relying on other raw materials. And as Charlie mentioned, the no and low alcohol trend, we've probably all been through these cycles where certainly low alcohol, we've seen it before. It's now made another comeback. So we're also looking at, can we actually produce low and possibly no alcohol beers using specific yeasts? So rather than relying on a processing to drive off and distill off the alcohol, maybe we can actually produce it completely naturally and just have a low or possibly even no alcohol relying on a yeast. Jumping into the processing area, we're certainly looking at spent grains. We know that the spent grain material is a significant waste from our brewing process. How do brewers deal with that? Often they're just giving it away to a local farmer who will feed it to some livestock. Sometimes there's no income for the farmer for that, no income for the brewer, and it may even cost the brewer to remove it from the brewery itself. So again, there's a cost that the brewer probably doesn't really want to have to deal with. So we're looking at options for upcycling. Can we actually turn that waste stream into a valuable product? There's some interesting stuff done previously. They're looking at composting and how they can actually just apply it across the farm and use it as almost like a fertilizer. There's a number of food products now available where people are actually literally taking the spent grain and turning it into cookies or breads, quite interesting foods. We know that the fibrous component of the spent grain can actually be used as an alternative to cardboard. So they're looking at ways they can upcycle, and actually you might be able to produce some of your cardboard packaging from your spent grain material. So you're having to buy less cardboard into the system. The specific area we're looking at is energy. How do we actually use this as a potential source of energy? There's lots of cellulosic material left over, lots of protein left over. How can we actually potential the spent grain into some sort of energy source that can be utilized in the brewery? The next thing we're looking at, again, going on more about this dry hopping process where brewers are actually adding hops at some point in fermentation, and we know it's valuable in adding hop flavor and aroma. But the downside to this is we see this hop creep and the possible impact of hop creep in terms of higher alcohol contents, more CO2 being produced, impacts on those sorts of parameters. How do we mitigate? Well, at the moment, we have a pretty good understanding of the role that hops have. We know that the diastatic power enzymes coming from hops can certainly continue to break down the non-fermentable sugars into fermentable sugars during fermentation, and therefore the yeast will continue the fermentation. We really don't understand that non-fermentable sugar profile. So we're looking to use more real-time technology to measure these non-fermentable sugar profile and maybe consider that before we dry hop. If there's potentially too much non-fermentable sugar, is there a risk that we could have more hop creep? Of course, timing of hop addition is important. And as I said, measuring more real-time data. So understanding the fermentable sugars in fermentation, pre and post dry hopping, might help brewers understand how they can control this more. We're certainly getting into understanding the composition more, and people would be familiar with some of these new omics technologies, and metabolomics has been used more. We're looking at understand the non-volatile profiles of worts and beer and the different products we're making, and certainly using proteomics, where we go from measuring a single protein content, total protein content in beer, to literally measuring the thousands of individual proteins, how the processing affects these, what happens during malting, what happens during brewing, and really, is there any other proteins of importance that we're really yet to understand or yet to actually consider, but now they might be actually more important than we've ever known. Quickly moving into the continuing and professional education, certainly Charlie touched on that early, and we have a range of courses from very basic introduction to practical brewing through to the Master Brewer Certificate program. And I'll make special mention about the Master Brewer Certificate because it's actually aligned to the industry. A lot of the students have come from a different background. They've had different careers and they're suddenly saying, no, I want to get into this industry. There's just so much interest. So they're actually transitioning from one career into a new career and wanting to get into brewing in a serious way. We actually have people coming from breweries that are wanting to upskill, improve their knowledge and improve their understanding of the process. So we get people from all walks of life coming to do the Master Brewers program. In general, they're all focused on getting a job in the industry. That's what they're focused on, or possibly even starting their own brewery. And we have a student from last year's program who's actually just started his brewery down near San Francisco. The news is that the 2022 program will become an online program. So instead of people having to come to Davis for 15 weeks, there is an alternative. So there will be a new online version of the Master Brewers program. It's in modules and it's over a specific 2-year timeline. Once you've done those 7 modules, then you can come to the campus and do the 2-week boot camp, which is a very intense 2 weeks. But we are keeping the 15-week program open. So there will still be another 15-week in-person program here in Davis next year. So we'll actually be running these 2 streams. We'll continue the in-person, but we'll certainly have this new online program. And as Charlie mentioned, there's a long history here. We've got a great track record. We cover the theory and practical components. We've got global expertise as instructors. So it's not just an academic exercise. We bring in some of the best in the world to give instruction. And certainly the pandemic, one of the upsides, if there are any upsides, one of the upside has been this virtual presentation. So we can actually have people from the UK, from New York, giving presentations to the students. So it sort of puts us more in touch out there with the global areas of expertise. And as Charlie said, sort of from that very early pilot brewery through to our current modern system here. So that image there is the pilot brewery. We've got 6 fermenters that take 1 batch. So 1 batch off the brew house into 1 fermenter, or we can split it into smaller fermenters that allows us to do much more detailed experimental work using replicated fermentations. And as I said, it's basically because we've got such a close connection with industry, and it's really the industry that kick-started this program way back in 1958. It was the industry saying we need something, and we've continued to listen to the industry. We listen to what they're looking for. We're offering suggestions, we offer them training, and we can also do research. And the other great thing, and Charlie mentioned one of our positions with the Sierra Nevada Endowed Brewer, we have another brewer. So we actually have 2 full-time brewers that allows us to actually, and these are experienced brewers, have come to the program, and allows us to sort of stay up to date with what's happening in the brewing industry. It's not just some academic exercise where we start to lose touch with reality. As I mentioned, the new CPE course, and I will move on, I'm taking way too much time. So there's the link to the brewing program. The new course is up next year. We are looking to tailor some other brewing courses in cellaring, packaging, and advanced brewing. And we are considering a distillation course in summer 2022. And as Charlie said, certainly going online has allowed us to deliver more webinars and online courses. So the link there can get you to the CPE website for brewing. And there might be something there that would be really important for you to take the next step in your career. A little bit of crystal ball gazing, where we see things happening. Well, certainly sustainability is an issue. How does the industry maintain sustainability and become more sustainable? And there's some areas that certainly the industry is looking at, and we're looking at some of those as well. Charlie mentioned some interesting beers, and I'm a bit like Charlie. I'm not a big fan of sour beers and possibly even some hazy beers, but we don't think hazy is a trend anymore. It's hazy is here to stay. And there's also some interesting stuff happening in hybrid beers, and we at some beer wine hybrids now, which is a really interesting combination. I can probably see Charlie's eyes rolling right now. And the other thing, the brewers are looking for more data. So they've got much more control of the process. So I think we're over to Q&A session, and this is just an image of my 4 students. One of the big things we're passionate about is diversity in our industry, and we have programs on ensuring diversity in the industry. And this was the first time myself and my 4 students had a chance to sit down and have a beer together when the pandemic started. And this was back in May. So it took 14 months before we could all get together and have a beer together. So that's it for me. Sorry, I took way too much time. Over to you, Mauricio and Olivia.
No worries. Thank you so much, Glenn. That was a very comprehensive. I think you went through so many topics, and you provided a vision of the innovative solutions from a supply chain perspective. It's not just the process of the brewing, but also considering, you know, the supplies, the packaging, and the future emerging challenges. So thank you so much for sharing this. And just because we are a little bit tough in the time, and we want to be responsible with our attendees, I would just send one question, direct one question to each of you. However, I want to mention that in the chat we have had so many questions, and really I am impressed of the amount of interest regarding, you know, fires and the impact in the lupulus. What are the alternative grains that would provide added value for beer quality, the non-alcoholic? So for the attendees, I will try to ask all of those questions afterwards, so maybe we can have that in our website. But now I want to ask, well, first I'll start with Charles. It's been a privilege listening to you. You have both been protagonists and leaders in the emerging brewing scene in California. So I want to ask you, what would you advise emerging microbrewers that are starting today in this business? So what would be your vision and your personal, you know, advice for these people that many of these are today present in this audience, virtual audience?
All right. Well, my advice very much would be to consider quality as the #1 issue. The customer will only come back. A successful quality is a product that does not come back to a customer who does come back. So you want repeat purchases. And the only way that's going to happen is if they like your beer and if your beer meets their expectation. So it should not vary, it should be consistent. And also, as I think I alluded to when I talked about Jack McAuliffe, his business model, he didn't brew enough beer. You know, he just didn't have enough income to sustain his business. So a lot of people find it very romantic to have, you know, bijou breweries producing special products on a small scale. But unless you produce enough beer and it's available and easily accessible by the customer, then you're not going to succeed. So there's got to be a good business model. Quality is very much a part of that. And I personally urge people to celebrate beer and celebrate in terms of materials, you know, in terms of materials that are available, not gimmicks, but yes, consider locally available raw materials and celebrate your local environment.
Great. Thank you so much for that inspiring answer. So now I have a question for Glenn. There's been a lot of traction here in the chat regarding the non-alcoholic, and I want to understand, what do you think regarding the entry of new varieties of beers, such as the non-alcoholics, the gluten-free, that are more aligned with healthy lifestyle trends? How do you think this can be a threat to the traditional beer market? And how do you envision these categories will grow and gain more demand, or how would this evolve in California in the following years?
I think the breweries operate in a environment where there's constant change. People are looking for new food types. As soon as there's a new mobile phone, they want to get the latest and greatest. So I think breweries are challenged with how do they stay in touch with people and their interests in not just life in general, but how do they viewing the environment, sustainability, all those sorts of platforms. They also have to understand that there's a changing demographic of consumers and what are consumers looking for. So we have this younger generation that is interested in alternative foods, you know, not just eating a burger and some chips. When they go to the pub, they're looking for other healthy alternatives in food. And I think they're also looking for healthier alternatives with alcoholic beverages as well. And I think beer is in a position much better than any of the other alcoholic beverages because it can actually vary its alcohol content without a lot of impact on flavor. So we can actually have low alcohol beers with huge body and flavor and not distract from the quality of the beer. Whereas you don't see a lot of low alcohol wines or low alcohol spirits. So I think the beer industry is in a good position to provide that diversity for people. They shouldn't see it as a threat. I think, as Charlie mentioned, that if you look at the total composition of beer, if it's not the healthiest beverage in the world, it's damn close to that. And if we take the alcohol, we reduce the alcohol or take it out, it has to be the most healthy. So I think this is an opportunity for brewers to think, how can they still make their normal beers they make, but also potentially introduce a low or no alcohol beer. It gives us alternatives as well, because we can go and have a beer at lunchtime and not be at risk with drink driving laws or going back to work because we've actually had a beer, but it hasn't got any alcohol. So I think there's other positives, and people think, oh, I don't want to drink that. I think some breweries are making some very delicious no alcohol and low alcohol beers, and I think it's something that's sort of, it's recycled, but now I think it's got a more permanent footprint in our industry.
Thank you so much for sharing your vision. It's really interesting, and actually it's one of the most named topics in the chat. So I think that provided a great understanding of what can be the opportunities and actually not looking at these emerging products as a threat. Well, so now as we continue with our program, I want to invite you to go take your coffee. I think it's a little bit early for a beer. In case you have a non-alcoholic, that can be perfect. But I want to invite you to watch a brief clip that we have prepared along with our partners and the UC Davis team for you to provide an understanding of the voices of our local industry. So please, our team will provide now the clip. Voy a cambiar ahora a español.
She now switches over to Spanish. She invites all of the participants and attendees to look at our video clip that we've prepared called Chile, a Brewing Country, Voices of the Industries that will inspire us for the subject that we wish to cover in our discussion panel that will come right after the video.
A nuestra planta y la pureza de la Patagonia.
En Latinoamérica, en los últimos 5 años, hemos visto un ajuste muy interesante en el consumo de cerveza, especialmente liderados por el movimiento de las cervezas craft. Hoy en día vemos que en Chile ha subido el consumo per cápita de 25 litros hace 10 años a un poco más de 52 en el presente. Creemos que esta tendencia va a continuar.
La evolución del mercado de cervezas en Chile ha sido
You are live. Well, we are back at our second panel of compared experiences between Chile and California and opportunities for collaboration. I hope everyone had liked the video. It was an effort just to give a broad view of opinions and visions, but the job of digesting all of these concepts presented, we have our discussion panel. We have no past present. We'll introduce Mena Abrao, General Manager of the ASECHI Chilean Brewers Society, which will be in charge of moderating the panel. So welcome, Jimena, and thank you for all the participants and their participation. Thank you, Olivia, for your presentation. Well, as a syndicate, as a union, we've always wanted to strengthen the environment for the national brewing industry. And in this case, we mark this seminar, which has been organized by UC Davis. This could be done from a focus of innovation in support of the small and mid-sized businesses. In this context, we want to make visible the challenges that the national industry faces from an integrated view of the value chain, identify needs and gaps of national industry regarding research and development and industrial scale-up of the small businesses to develop capacity and technological level. And of course, we have among the goals of this panel to strengthen and generate collaboration spaces between industry and academy, from small to large businesses in the sector. For this panel, we've invited four great speakers. The first is Tom Starr, head brewer of the Southern Brewing Company, and class of 29 from UC Davis, Claudio Gonzalez, I apologize, craft beer, Ignacio Danieri, head brewer and founder of Intrinsical Brewery, and a diplomat of advanced brewing technology of the Brewing Academy. And finally, Francisco Torres, commercial manager of Austral Breweries. So as we've seen at the first panel, particularly from the voices of the industry video, I would like to start the discussion asking Claudio Iturra for his experience in our country and his knowledge in the sector, if he's registered changes in consumption trends and the scenario towards the future regarding how the industry adapts and reinvents itself in the post-COVID 2019. I think there was a mistake in the last name. I am Claudio Gonzalez. Oh, I apologize. For those who don't know me, and the presentation is a bit weird, I am the general manager of Alameda Nirvana and also Honest Mike and Pulento Joe. So we've had a quite long experience since we started this subject. We started doing beer at home in 2008. So we've seen how the market has evolved in the last years, even with the compared experience that we have with the United States, where we have fortunately have had the opportunity to travel to on several occasions and seen how the subject has grown. I remember being there starting from 2011 onwards, and it's incredible how the market has changed in the United States itself. And from there, one would see what was happening and then compare to what's happening here. Here, we were all just home brewers, people whom we would meet in competition. There were some larger brands where the Chilean market, the only option of those years was to try to go to a volume salesman, a volume retailer with massive supermarket exposure. We have Cross, Mestras examples, where the idea is the model was to make beer and distribute all over Chile, and it was the volume that would achieve business sustainability. Thus, I think this is talked about not many years ago, and I think today this has changed radically. Thus, we're at 2021, the increase in beer consumption has increased considerably. There was a report I've read where it's 51 liter per person per year. So this is noticeable. I think it was around 30 several years ago. This has increased greatly. And in hand with this increase in consumption, think it has been repeated with some years of delay compared to the United States. This consumption has gone in hand with more cap artisanal beers. So I think that the industrial beer consumption has increased. This per capita consumption has also been increased and seen by artisanal beer consumption. Thus, what we have is today we find a much more experimented consumer, a more demanding consumer, and a consumer which likewise, like everything has changed, the consumer has also been more educated in subjects where malt, hops, and barley were Chinese for them. Today are words of every day, and whoever you talk with, they will know what it's about. You can talk of different beer styles, and often it becomes more often that people are more understood with the product. It is in this sense that people have become more sophisticated in their consumption, and thus the imported beers has been key because, as I've said in 2014, 2012, it wasn't a surprise, but the quality of local breweries were still quite low. It wasn't a good beer. Many people whom also didn't know of it because there were few people who studied. The majority of people who do beers or have breweries are the same owners that started as a hobby that made to a business. So I think the arrival of imported beers, for example, Nirvana, whom started at the end of 2013, has allowed to elevate standards and has allowed global level beers in Chile. And I think this is important because someone would go to the supermarket and buy an artisanal beer at the gondola, and the 90% of the cases the beer would turn bad due to. So when we were able to increase the standard and reach a product where you were able to pay for a bit more but to still have quality product, I think was a game changer, and it has made people be able to have a Sculpiniva, which is the iconic San Diego beer, to drink it here still fresh because the beer has traveled cold. I think this has become key in the subject. And what we've seen in the last 2, 3 years, the subject of quality of imported beers compared to Chilean beer, the ranges used to be brutal. But today we see that the quality has increased considerably. So today we see those whom are on both halves of the business, we see that there's a great interest for imported beers because it ensures quality and ensures many things that many may not. But today, a serious brewery in market has a standard of quality where you could go buy the beer and even find it cheaper and know that you will have a good beer. You won't have the question if the beer is good or bad. But today, quality, let's say 5, 10 different breweries, local breweries, none of them, or today, quality ensures that the product will be good at consumption. So this has come a little bit in hand with a higher level of education, specifically of what we see today here with the opportunity of being at a seminar organized with UC Davis in Santiago. We haven't even dreamed of. UC Davis we used to see as the Mecca where we would have loved to have gone to study, and it has always been as so. But to be here today and talk with you today is a privilege. So if you ask me, I think that the change in consumption habits explains of what I commented previously. It has moved and the quality of local production is better. If I have to think a bit more of towards the future and what will come, I believe that in this subject where we have more experimented, more demanding consumers, there are some things that we have to continue to do to continue satisfying said demands. I believe that of the first issues, and also commented by Glenn and Charles, comes through the fact that education is necessary. It has always been key, and in the majority for us has been a hobby that becomes business. Every time you do beer, the least amount is 20 liters. So you usually have 60 bottles of beer that you won't be able to drink yourself, thus must be sold from day one. So anyone can brew beer, but to do a good, consistent beer in time, well, that is another issue. So I think we need more education, both for producers and clients. I think that client education has increased considerably with the issue of the imported beers, with the issues of better quality. But I think producer education is still missing because unfortunately we still do not have many options available in Chile in general. Thus, to have Davis with the possibility of someone offering a master brewers program could elevate standards considerably. Thus, I believe this is the first point that for me would be the tip of the iceberg. Then, also considering that we will have more education, I believe, thus it will be probable that we will offer better consistency and quality. And by having better consistency and quality, we can allow ourselves and have the luxury of more experimentation. Because if I do not have consistency or education, I could do all the experiments of the world, but for them to come out correct is different. So if we think of how the market has changed, I don't know if anyone has known of pale ale Sierra Nevada. It was the flash sale for years, and maybe only 60% of Sierra Nevada sales were only pale ales. But today it has dramatically changed. People want new things constantly, every month. If you look at the US breweries and the lineup of the Brooklyn breweries and Massachusetts, they're all 500 different beers per year. Thus, it is crazy. And the idea is that the 500 beers be good, because to do them just to do them, there's no sense. So when there's education, we look for consistency, we get better quality, and thus this must come in hand with the experience that can also be offered for the public. I believe that it's not sufficient to have a can or a bottle and sell it. It comes in hand of what is the experience that is sold to the client, what the label is about, what's behind the label, how I connect to them, how I achieve the client, assuming that the beer is good, but how I achieve their connection with me. What is the story I tell? How do I relate to the community? How I add attributes to the business so that it becomes in a more sustainable business, in a business that contributes from welfare and to do, instead of just an economic point of view, behind the model. Thus, this has to be a mix of things. We also have to add the fact that today, for a successful brewery and business, only making beer is not sufficient, and it's to have a consistency. It has to also be related to the internal business culture, solid culture of the people working with me and are not happy with what I am doing and wish to be part of this. It becomes difficult that I am able to offer the community and my clients a solid experience, which is what they demand at the moment. So I believe that if I could give if I could get tips of what would be most relevant today, would be education, to get the best education as possible. Then I didn't comment, but equipment and are relatively acceptable. We do not need to have the latest state of the art equipment from a German factory. We can work with national equipment, we can make it work, but it has to do with education. And with normal equipment, I don't know if such a high investment is needed. So this can bring us towards consistency, better quality. Thus, we have
Y también
to
tiene preguntas.
deliver how to deliver the experience to the client. I apologize. Yes. What happens is that due to time, being very brief of what you've said, it is very interesting. So we're talking about education, education, and education. Just a small tidbit of beer consumption, how much it has increased. In 2020, consumption according to our registries are around 57 liters per person per year, a little bit more of what you mentioned, which was of last year. In the same context of education, I would like to ask Tom if he believes that research and development are motors of innovation, and how this is related to added value given to the product and how this operates in the virtual circle that exists between California and Chile. I specifically refer to how in California we can transfer the virtuous circle experience achieved at the Californian UC Davis University towards a local experience, which is a quite diverse, extensive country.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I am Thomas Stoll. I work at Sudwork Brewing Company right now. I'm a head brewer. I've been brewing since 2009. This is a very good question. How I sort of look at research and development, I believe is innovation is being driven by brewery personnel responding to the changing customer tastes. The personnel should have the skills and knowledge ready to adapt and lead the directions that the market is pointing them towards. From this conversation with the brewery and the customers, the brewery will be able to develop the techniques needed. And then the supplementary industries will then apply that knowledge that the brewery has created to create better inputs. And so it kind of creates this a more robust industry brewing and stemming from the small microbreweries or breweries around just trying to innovate and create new experiences for the customers and creates this whole world of the brewing industry. Some examples that I sort of thought of would be the hop research that's being done for a lot of the new hazy beers that are coming out. They've changed the varietals, made them more fruit forward to sort of apply those type of hops to a certain style of beer that wasn't available 10 years ago. Also looking at the micro canning lines that have been so important to a lot of breweries around the areas that have been able to shift from a draft focus and into a smaller pack so that they can continue their business and also provide the beer that is needed for the people around their customers that are needed. And also, as Glenn has talked about and Charlie's talked about, the yeast research, which has been able to sort of eliminate a lot of hop usage by sort of mimicking the thiols that are produced from the dry hops. And you can see that the yeast is able to produce them during fermentation. So sort of reducing the amount of waste and costs. In California, I see a large number of breweries, they compete for that next customer. It's very, very competitive. All the shelf space seems to be taken up. So we are applying all of our knowledges and techniques to try to create a unique experience for each customer. From this, we're using this prolonged conversation and taking the advances of the previous brewing generations and applying them to our world. It's only possible with trained personnel and that building upon that brewing knowledge, and that we're able to apply these people that have been trained through education, and they're able to manipulate the brewing process to meet the customer's demand. This is where it's really important, where UCD and like institutions are able to respond to their brewing needs for better training in personnel. I believe that well-trained personnel that can apply their brewing knowledge is the foundation of a successful brewery, and it also lays a foundation for the kind of a proliferation or an expansion of an industry where the quality is raised and consumer excitement is met, and it continues moving forward into a future for the brewing industry.
Excelente. Súper interesante.
Excellent. Very interesting view of how the local Californian experience works. Ignacio, as a counterpoint, how do you see this part of relating the gap of human capital development and product in the Chilean experience, according to the Chilean experience? You are silenced, it seems. Well, hi, welcome. Thank you for the question and the invitation. We, with our partners, have been brewing beer for more than 8 years at home, then in the industry, and I have been lucky to study abroad and work time. I believe that, as Claudio says, the quality in Chile has changed and has exponentially changed to a level where many types of beer can be seen also internationally, not only the more stranger beers or the different fermentation types. We have very good Chilean beer types. I believe that to achieve the next level, it becomes necessary to have better quality control in the different processes and different parameters to define correct quality parameters to be able to repeat product after each batch. And facing this, Chile, to continue to advance in the future, needs better human capital. For us Chileans, it becomes difficult to install a brewery because there are very few academies or universities that are teaching this at a level that may help truly towards Chilean brewing to the next level of quality to be recognized internationally. It is in this sense, I think that some universities still need to get into the industry more, that the industry supports with the universities, that we are able to develop new product in Chile. We have a good climate and good land to produce many new products. In the south, they are planting hops. So it may be an interesting niche for university, for some laboratories to develop new product and the human and new human capital. And facing this also, the equipment and supplies issue is critical. It's difficult to acquire them. Sometimes they must be brought in from abroad. And here it may be key for some university or industry to develop good quality equipment to improve their quality and product stability in time. A good fermenter will bring a better quality of the product that may have the development of the full Chilean industry. I think this is critical and will be the way to advance in our next steps as a country and to develop the industry in Chile. And this, UC Davis has had the opportunity so that Chileans can online and have a presence, and they will bring forth the quality issue. And as more education is seen, there's a continuing interest in improving quality and Chilean product. Perfect. In this context of the gap that you've commented between education and technology and this level that has to be imported, I would like to ask you very briefly, both Tom and to the three of you, Claudio, Ignacio, and Tom, if you believe if there is a space for collaboration, if collaboration is important between the different sizes of breweries, if there is a space for collaboration between the larger breweries
en términos del aporte
and
mutuo que pueden
the smaller breweries regarding the mutual support they can give each other. Who's next?
I don't mind talking about
Who
that.
would like to go first?
I believe it's very important for the whole brewing industry to be able to have sort of a medium to be able to exchange information, such as a brewing association, some sort of medium where people can come together and be able to share ideas. I know that was a very important thing for a lot of microbreweries, is to share yeast and share techniques and things that do over time. It's something that we've done in California often, but as competition gets up, it does become less and less of a normal practice. And I miss that sort of common shared knowledge that we used to exchange freely. But I still see it in small pockets in it, but I feel like a lot of times maybe it's best to do it with a brewery association or a sort of union, so that there is this medium where everyone's sort of on equal footing and able to share and experience the knowledge in the same footing as it should be before.
Claudio, ¿querés tú?
Dale tú, Nacho, dale nomás.
Yes, Ignacio, please. Well, as Tom says, it is important that opportunities to share knowledge exist. I believe that the large and small industry has space to help themselves Knowledge can come sometimes from the most unexpected spaces, so it may be that the large ones are interested in vice versa, and also open space to develop new research, new products, to test them and to try to collaborate them among the whole industry, because it's the industry that grows. And this is important, and people can, and it's what's best for Chile. Personally, just like everyone, I agree with that. And I may say the most critical point. I think the large companies in Chile still owe us greatly. I don't know. To have some access, to have some dialogue from CCU companies, something that has never been given, and even very little is done with Cross. Cross used to be the champion of the Chilean Sierra Nevada, where Sierra Nevada had opened all the doors and does collaboration with smaller breweries. Thus, I believe they have a lot still to give. I am happy that a brewery like Cross is doing its all innovation program recently. So eventually to have the possibility to share with them would be incredible, because among the small ones we do so. As seen in the US, where David against Goliath, the small ones, we have something similar seen here, but it would be incredible for not to be a struggle, but it to be something done jointly. As Nacho says, we have a lot to lose, and I imagine they also have a lot to learn. Two businesses that also work differently. Yes, it is so. I think that the scenario where beer becomes more and more appreciated and where beer consumption has grown regarded gaining space in front of other products, I think we have a great opportunity with niches for everyone, because the best beer, as someone says, the best beer is the one you have in your hand, right? I make notes of several questions that were asked from the audience. The first question would be, it's my question, and it's basically, what should a beer have so that it should be considered high quality to according to my criteria? I can only refer to the craft brewers criteria, which point out that artisanal beers or craft beers have to comply with two characteristics. One, to have no more than 25% of participation by other companies, and the other is the production size must represent less than 3% of the country's sales. This is what is established in the Principles Declaration. I'll just leave it till there, because I think in Chile we haven't carried out a definition and we haven't reached a sole criteria to catalog beers according to their size. I think that the size of 3% is reasonable, which is quite huge in the US. If we go to 3% of the Chilean market, we're talking about 350,000 tons of liter per year, which is a brutality, you may say. So we do not have just one sole definition. I would like that if we could collaborate and define on a definition that satisfies everyone, so that we could all work tranquil in this work, the large ones and the small ones, which I think is of great importance, because I will repeat, in this growing world, I think for beer, there's enough space for all. A second question, I don't know whom to ask, but very briefly, they ask, what should occur so that the craft world reaches retail sales? We, as a syndicate, don't have to do with commercialization. I don't know if Claudio, if you have more experience, could tell us a bit more about the subject. And after that, we will go towards our survey. So I will leave the questions open, please. If you have questions, please write it down, but we will be closing our session. When they ask about retail, they're talking about supermarket sales, right? I think that unfortunately, the great problem that exists today, and what Ignacio said before, has to do with the production methods used. Fortunately, there are breweries ourselves that are waiting for a canner where we can control oxygen levels, which are dissolved in the can. So it has to deal. And also the temperature issue, where it will be stored. If there's beer with oxygen and there's no equipment to eliminate can from a can, and then the beer goes to a gondola or a shelf in the supermarket at room temperature, those two elements are critical and what will end up
no tengamos la
the
oportunidad de hacerlo.
product. So unless we do not have the opportunity to assure that the oxygen dissolved in the can is minimum, and if you can negotiate with the retailer to keep the cans cool, unless this doesn't happen, I prefer not to incur in expenses. And I think Pablo and the other brewing partners here all have the same opinion because no one wants to risk their product. Perfect. So we interpret that there are deficits apart from training, which have to do with the value chain of how beer is moved after production. Exactly. And also to make a difference. The beers we sell are expensive, not because we just thought of them to be expensive, but they have a high amount of ingredients. So when you go to supermarket and they begin to margin and create margin upon the sale, we effectively don't have volume to sustain such small margin levels. So if you can control product quality and you have a relatively acceptable volume where we can reach more people, I think it would be a mix of these three aspects and phenomena. Very good, very interesting. Unfortunately, continue to talk. I will apologize, everyone. Francisco Torres from Brewer. For everyone for the inconvenience. But to close, we wish to invite everyone to participate in a small survey that should appear on your screens. I don't know if we see it now. Yes, there it is. Thank you very much. The idea is to scan the QR code and you will get a website with a survey. And naturally, when a question appears, you can select the alternative. And if there are issues for QR scanning, you can go into the website indicated there. Well, we will have to do a small space, give a small space to receive the results. There we go. Well, I wish to point out that we have more than 170 participants connected live to our session, both from the US, Chile, and Argentina. So we are very, very happy with the results of this conversation. And our first approach towards this subject of combining culture and California with Chile. We are looking at the results seen here. Clearly, research and investigation as a motor for industry is clear. Its role is very clear. I can choose two alternatives. There are two alternatives. You can choose up to two alternatives in the survey questions. The idea is to answer the questions of all of the subjects of the seminar. Select what you consider would be the priority, the prioritizing national industry. Two questions, please, so that we can see how we are able to advance. The logistics chain seems to lead. And then the development of human capital and the opportunities for development that we've seen in the seminar. I think of what we are also solving here. There's a strong, and in fact, there's a strong question that came from the panel, the link between tourism and the brewing industry, also something that is very interesting and which can be confirmed by any of the panelists. Can you hear us? Yes? Yes, we hear you. I believe that tourism, not only tourism, thinking of you taking a car and driving anywhere for a beer. If I could criticize again, I think
que tiene que ver con el
we have
tema
a
de los
great issue, which has to do with the licensing and the patents and the municipality permits. Because we, 2 weeks ago, had a license approved in the municipality of Santiago that had been 2 years in the making. It becomes difficult to rise as so, and I feel lucky because we've had the way of sustaining, but there are people, I imagine that there is people who cannot wait 2 years, so to have a license given to them. And I go towards that. It's not, it's the same that happened with Intrinsica. They also struggled hand in hand with the municipality of Santiago and also Spont. I think that said tourism, if it's reflected where you can be able to go to a brewery after a subway trip, I think this has to be communicated and consider it as tourism. Someone could go to a
tour que te
brewery,
explique lo que
drink and eat there, and have a tour with an explanation of what's happening. If the authorities are able to be more flexible, because unfortunately in Chile, alcohol is demonized. Everyone believes that alcohol is buying a bottle of Sprite at 2,000 pesos and to end up drunk in the street. We are unfortunately are not of the same market, but we're all in the same bag. So unless there's no clarity on the negative externalities of harder alcohol that it produces, we've heard Glenn and Charles say that beer is the most healthiest drink that exists. So unless there's clarity and strictness regarding the consumption of Chilean Sprite and not to demonize alcohol consumption, I think it will be difficult for someone to rise. If we unfortunately are able to do so, we hope others can. Our offices are available. If anyone has a question or need counsel, please do forward, where we will always be available to drink a beer and talk. But also the collaboration between larger and smaller, it's more important, the smaller breweries and municipality collaboration. And precisely the objective of this seminar was to raise these subjects and open conversations in such a way that this is the first impulse and to continue to talk among us all to solve these gaps and to make this product, which is of course the number one product of Chile. Beer is over 70% of all of the alcoholic beverages consumed in Chile. So Chile is a beer drinking country, and the idea is to make more and more
a la cerveza que se
breweries
consume
with our national beers that are consumed. It's not the same to take a to drink a beer in Arica compared to Punta Arenas. So very interesting. And the interesting results of the surveys are being raised to open a second conversation would be our goal. And just to close, we wish to thank everyone for their participation and interest in this Chile, California seminar, which likewise has a goal to strengthen the national brewery industry, and also to thank our partners of the event, which would be Cervez Brewery Austral, Intrinsical, Laboratory Dinolab, Maltexco, and the organizations that have supported us during this event. We thank the Chileans Society for Beer Production Society and the Independent Society, ASI. Of course, I mustn't miss thanking Centrum Events, our digital partner, partners, and of course to UC Davis, whom have brought this fantastic idea of relating to each other so that we could all go forward and strengthen our national brewing scene. We appreciate your presence. Thank you for this first instance. And with Claudio, we invite you all so that the doors of our union are always open for all. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon. I think it's one afternoon and it's the moment of a good beer. Thank you very much.